Yep. Thanks very much for joining us here this morning. I want to give you an update on coronavirus. The Deputy Chief Health Officer has joined us and can take some questions about all of those issues, and Jacinta has joined us as well as Kevin Devlin from the Level Crossing Removal Authority to give us an update on a number of important road and rail projects in southeastern Melbourne. Those jobs, that progress is perhaps more important than it's ever been. So Jacinta's going to take us through a couple of milestones with that. First things first, there are 1,864 cases of coronavirus. That's 17 more than yesterday. If I can take you through the breakdown as best we know it at this point, there'll be a further release from Annalise and Brett later in the day, once further investigative work has been done, once more is known about individual cases. But at a top level, there is 1 from hotel quarantine, 2 that are associated with known outbreaks, 3 that are the subject of routine testing, so what we can be certain of is that there will be some significant community transmission within those numbers. The exact amount of that will be determined following those processes that I've just alluded to. As we said on Saturday, and indeed again yesterday, this is still with us. This is not over. And I know and understand that so many Victorians, perhaps all Victorians, want this to be over. But we simply can't pretend that the virus is gone, that the virus is somehow not in our state. It is here. It travels so fast. It is so infectious. If people do the wrong thing, if people, for instance, have a positive test or are asked to quarantine because they're a close contact and don't do that, and then go and spend even a modest amount of time with others, it is almost certain that they will give the virus to other people. That is how fast this spreads. That's how infectious this is. That's the battle we're in. That's the challenge that we face. So what I ask all Victorians to do is the right thing and the smart thing. If you are sick, you cannot go to work. If you are sick, you cannot visit friends and family. If you are sick, there's only one thing you should do. Even with the mildest of symptoms, you should come forward and get tested. On the issue of testing, we've done now more. We've got results back because there is a bit of lag between tests done and results being processed in the lab. That's just a process of volume. 675,000 test results have come back to us since January 1. That is an enormous effort. There were 8,149 results received yesterday. That's very big for a Sunday in effect, because that'll be Sunday's testing, being Monday's results. We anticipate, and again, if we can provide you with further clarity with an exact number later in the day via the usual release that goes out, we will. But all of our rough tallies from testing centres, we think we've done something like 16,000 to 18,000 tests yesterday, which again is a very big number. I want to thank all of those Victorians who've come forward and got tested. I know there's been some delays. That's just a function of many, many people doing the right thing, and I thank them profoundly for what is a really big and powerful contribution to our fight against this virus. Coming forward and getting tested, even with very mild symptoms, really does give us the data and the evidence to do the contact tracing, to try and win this battle, to suppress as much as we possibly can and drive this down to acceptable levels, particularly when it comes to community transmission. Further detail about those testing numbers will be forthcoming later in the day. As you know, and Annalise can speak to this in more detail, but Brunswick East Primary School and Keilor Views Primary School, they've had students test positive at each of those. So they're in the usual way, they'll be closed. They'll be the subject of deep clean and all the other work, including the contact tracing that our 1,000-strong coronavirus detective squad will be engaged in and is engaged in every minute of every day. If you're sick, you can't go out. If you've got even mild symptoms, you have to come forward and get tested. And if you're asked to quarantine, you need to do as you are asked. Not just for you, because it's not just about individuals. This is about all of us. Everyone following the simplest of rules, cough etiquette, not going anywhere other than to get tested if you are unwell, keeping your distance, not shaking hands, not greeting people with hugs and kisses, not pretending essentially that this is gone, because it isn't. It is here, and whilst I'm confident that our public health team is doing everything they possibly can, They simply won't achieve the outcome that we want if people don't support them, don't help them in the work that they're doing. And if people don't work with me and the public health team to get on top of this, then we won't. And we have seen, as we said on Saturday, many families, large families, who have gathered in numbers beyond the rules. That is just not on. It is not acceptable, particularly if anybody in those family groupings has even mild symptoms, let alone if anybody in those family groupings has been told to quarantine as a close contact or even a positive case. Now, just on home, it's really important, again, and I'll be grateful to you to again remind all of your listeners and viewers and readers, it is your household and 5 guests. And again, some common sense. It doesn't necessarily mean you have 5 guests around to your house every single lunch and every single dinner. Try and be sensible about this, given that regardless of small numbers who are doing the wrong thing, although I do think that there are perhaps larger numbers of Victorians who perhaps think this is a new phase and we can do things a little differently. It doesn't matter how many people are doing the wrong thing. Everybody will pay the price if we get to a point where restrictions, either localised or across the state, need to be reintroduced. I am very grateful to everyone who's doing the right thing, and all I can do is give Annalise and Brett and all of their team all the resources they need, and we're doing that. All I can do is ask Victorians to do the right thing by their family and every Victorian family. This is a challenge, but we're equal to it if we all do the right thing. You cannot, if you're unwell, pretend you aren't. You cannot, if you're Victorian, or indeed if you're anywhere in the country, you can't pretend that this is over, because it simply isn't. Just quickly, before I ask JA to add to my comments, to go to other matters, because other things do go on, other work is still forging ahead and it needs to. I just want to make a couple of comments about other things that the public health team are doing. There has been very deep engagement with localised communities, multicultural communities, multi-faith communities. We think that's appropriate, and we're really, really working hard to make sure that every Victorian, regardless of their circumstance, knows and understands the rules, knows and understands how serious this is, and knows and understands that their conduct, the conduct of each of us, will have a direct bearing on what all of us have to deal with. I can also confirm for you that there is literally an army of people going out door knocking. There will be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people from our expanded public health team out there door knocking in hotspot suburbs and other areas if that's deemed appropriate. They will do that job providing public health advice, making sure that everybody, where language and other issues like that won't be a barrier. It is standing up now, but it will certainly expand in the next couple of days. And I would encourage people, if you get that door knock, take the time to have a conversation with the dedicated public servant who's going to speak to you, because I'll give you some information that you can in turn pass on to others, and that might lead to better behaviour, it might lead to people doing the right thing across the board, and that's critical in order to get on top of this. Just finally, it is very important that we remember National Cabinet has endorsed a suppression strategy. Now, it's fine for people to measure a suppression strategy against the results that come from an eradication strategy, but they're not the same thing. Eliminating this virus is a different task to suppressing it. We would hope to get to a point where there are many days of zero. We all hope for that. But in the interim, we've all been very clear, from the Prime Minister, the Chief Medical Officer, myself, all of us, that we would see more cases, we would see more outbreaks. And that's why the public health team are working so hard. Please work with them. Please make their job a little easier by doing the right thing in every setting, in every way. That's how we will beat this. Now, to talk about other work that's going on, the employment from which has perhaps never been more important. I'll ask the Minister for Transport and Infrastructure to talk about that quickly, and then we're happy to take any questions, and of course Annalise is here to do that.
Thank you, Premier. As the Premier's indicated, as part of the $70 billion pipeline of transport infrastructure projects that the Andrews Labor government has got going right across the state of Victoria, I'm really pleased this morning to provide an update on some road and rail projects that are occurring right now in the southeast, and the great progress that has been made on those projects, and also supporting tens of thousands of jobs in the construction industry and also the associated supply chain. And the first update this morning is to announce the completion of works at the Hallam Road Upgrade Project. And for those of you who know this part of Melbourne, Hallam Road has been a difficult and dangerous part of the road network. Since 2012, there's been 22 accidents along this part of the road network. And so the work that's been done in recent weeks and months to upgrade Hallam Road has added extra capacity and extra lane each way between Pound Road and Ormond Road. There's also work that's been going on to remove a dangerous dogleg, extra traffic lights, walking and cycling paths as well. All up, this is to provide a much safer journey for motorists who travel along this road every day. There's 10,000 motorists who rely on Hallam Road every day, and another 40,000 use the intersection with Hallam Road, South Gippsland Highway and Evans Road. So this is an important local project. It's supported 70 jobs during the construction, and we're really pleased to see this project come to a completion. And also in and around this local community, there's 2 level crossing removals that, when these works are also done, are going to provide an additional safety boost to traffic in that local area, to the movement of traffic and people, and also a big safety boost through the removal of these dangerous and congested level crossings. And the work has already started on removing the Evans Road level crossing. Evans Road was closed by the local council back in 2006 for safety reasons, and when we remove this level crossing, do the associated works on Hallam Road, it will reopen Evans Road, providing better connections for that local community, a safer connection with the removal of the level crossing, plus a brand new station at Marinda. A brand new station is being built as part of this level crossing program, and this level crossing is being removed with a road bridge, and already beams are starting to be moved in place, beams that are made in Kilmore, further evidence of how we're creating jobs in local communities right across the state as part of our level crossing removal program. And the work on Evans Road will be completed at the end of 2020. It's the first of another 4 level crossings to go on between the Dandenong and Cranbourne section of the Cranbourne line, and by the end of 22, the Cranbourne corridor will be the first level crossing free corridor on our metropolitan train network. And finally, Hallam Road work's going to start ramping up towards the end of this year on removing the Hallam Road level crossing and also the construction of a new Hallam station, and we'll be releasing in coming weeks the designs for a new Hallam station, which have been as a result of a lot of community feedback who've specifically called out the need for safer and better pedestrian connections to this new station. And Hallam Road will be removed with the construction of a rail bridge, as I said, a new station, and again supporting jobs in the construction industry and supporting jobs in that local community. With some further work that's gone on around Mentone and Cheltenham overnight, we now have 38 dangerous and congested level crossings have been removed as part of the program put in place by the Andrews Labor government at the end of 2014 to remove dangerous and congested level crossings right across the state of Victoria. That, coupled with our road projects, other projects like the Metro Tunnel and the North East Link projects, our regional projects, road and rail, are supporting tens of thousands of jobs. We've been able to keep and support these jobs going through this difficult period of time, and also plan ahead to support these jobs into the future.
Very good. So obviously our commitment is to get rid of 50 of these things by the end of 2022. We're going to smash through that and deliver that well ahead of schedule, but there'll be other opportunities for us to talk about that in the future. Happy to take any questions unless you want to hear from Annalise directly. Would that be useful to you?
You said that some Victorians seem to think this is a new phase. Why do you think they think that?
Oh, well, I think it's clear that if you go from an order to stay in your house and then you move to an easing of restrictions, completely consistent with, in fact, a little slower than the National Cabinet timeline, for which we've been criticised, and that's fine, then, you know, there are some who I think perhaps think that this is not as serious. Rather than speculating on what might have motivated some of this behaviour. I'm just really clear to call it out. You can't have large groups of people in your house. You can't go to work if you are sick. You can't send your kids to school if they are sick. All of these, this is not an ordinary winter. And I've said many, many times, we can't just flick a switch and go back to normal. We've got to find a COVID normal. And part of that is all of those things that are now really clear. Washing your hands, coughing into the crook of your arm, keeping your distance, making sure that if you've got even mild symptoms, you come forward and get tested. And again, I probably can't thank people enough. Thank you so much to all of those Victorians who have come forward and got tested, many of which have got very, very mild symptoms, and the time they're spending in queues, the inevitable queues for testing, despite the fact that we have 100 sites, is a powerful contribution to our fight against this virus, and I thank them for that. This is not over. It is far from over. Not just in Victoria, it's not over anywhere in our country. The vigilance that will need to be, whether it be international travel, all of these rules around hygiene, all of these rules around mass gatherings, they are in one form or another with us until we get a vaccine. And that may well be many, many months away.
Premier, why are we seeing this in Victoria and not in other states?
Well, look,
New South Wales.
sure. Well, I would note there was a community transmission there yesterday. There'll be community transmissions. There'll be cases in different parts of the country at different times. It's a good question, and one that we've been working very hard to try and get an answer to. I think the most likely outcome is that we had low-level chains of community transmission that we were not necessarily aware of. Now, the fact that we weren't aware of that, even though we did a testing blitz of a best part of 175,000 tests, just makes the point. Unless you test every single Victorian at the same time and then somehow get the results of those tests at the same time, you can never have a total and complete picture of how much community transmission, how many, albeit isolated, chains of transmission are out there in the Victorian community. Again, I'll just take you back to the point. This is not a zero cases every day strategy. If we can get to that point, and we have had some 0 days in recent times, last few weeks, but that's not the strategy that has been determined. That is not what we are aiming for at this point. There is an acceptable level of new cases. We're not at that point now. The amount of community transmission that we've got is too high. We've got a really good handle on where it's coming from, and it is principally families, larger families often, making decisions that are not in accordance with the rules and are not the right thing to do.
Just on those larger families, how much of this uptick, this spike, if you like, can be attributed to these people who have known they have the virus and have gone to work or held these family gatherings? How much can be attributed to?
Well, I think when you say, the reason that we made the point on Saturday, and I've again referenced it today, that there are a number, but it's a small number of people who have tested positive and have then gone and pretended that they didn't test positive. That is not a large number of people, but this again makes the point. It only takes one or two people to do something like that, and all of a sudden you've got many cases. The best way to answer it, and I'm more than happy to get someone from the public health team to maybe come back to you, but again, this is not about necessarily just focusing on that one person or that small group of people. There is a broader problem here too, and that's evidenced by the fact that in today's numbers, there'll be a significant number of these cases that are attributable to family activity. I'm not suggesting that it's people that have gone and done the example you just spoke about, but they are outbreaks, they are transmission within family groups, and of course I'll take you back to that point that since June, we've had about half of our new cases. The transmission of the virus can be tracked back to families. I understand why families want to get together. I understand why people are deeply frustrated that this virus is with us, but there are ways to do that, and everyone has to make a contribution. Otherwise, we will all suffer because we won't be able to contain this.
Premier, you already have to change the way it deals with quarantine, because that's the other area where there's a big spike in the
Yeah, there's been a couple of challenges in a couple of quarantine settings. We literally have, I haven't got the latest numbers, but I'll come back to you on it. Many thousands of people have been quarantined in hotels. There have been issues in lots of different settings across the country when it comes to hotel quarantine. It's a challenging thing to do from a very practical point of view. I don't think you could ever rule out, just like you can't rule out in a health setting, people who are running the service can potentially contract the virus. And in turn, anyone who's positive has the direct risk, the direct likelihood almost, of infecting others. Well, that's under constant review. That's a process that we continue to learn from every single day, because any activity that involves literally thousands and thousands of people, you'll get varying degrees of compliance. You'll get variability in many different ways. But I'm confident that those processes, where there's been a bunch of reviews, a whole lot of work been done to make sure that that's as good as it can possibly be. But that's not a risk-free activity, but it is certainly much lower risk than if we had, for want of a better term, just kind of done an honesty policy and said, okay, you've returned from a country that is in a very bad place in terms of coronavirus cases, so it's rampant, and we'll just ask you to go home, and of course you'll never leave your house for 14 days, nor will you have a visitor. We do know, go back pre-hotel quarantine, there were some people who, they thought it was okay maybe to not stay at home. And I think that the risk, if you were to rate the two risks, hotel quarantine is much lower, and is one of the reasons why we have all low-level cases as opposed to much higher-level cases.
Is there an argument for putting up those staff who work in those hotels in other hotel rooms, a bit like the health workers at
And some of those arrangements are in place now, just like there are arrangements. For instance, we have had a number of people that have tested positive, and they live in large families. They may have vulnerable members of their family, and they've been put up in hotels as well. Not as a compulsory thing, but just as here is an offer to help you practically manage the fact that you need to isolate, and that even in the biggest of houses, if there's a dozen of you living there, or lots of kids, mum and dad, maybe some parents, that is grandparents rather, then it just might not be practical to be able to keep your distance. So we are putting up a number of people just like that. That's been happening for quite some time, and we may need to do more of that.
We'll use the ADF. Just use the ADF for hotel quarantine security.
No, I don't think we need to do that now. But of course, I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for the ongoing dialogue that I have with him. And
worked in other states, so they don't have a leakage from hotels.
oh well, I don't know that you could necessarily describe any hotel quarantine system as being risk-free. There are always inherent risks.
The same contagion we've had here, the leakage, if you like.
Well, Rich, we're not arguing about it. What I'm saying to you is, I don't think we need to get to that point. But I'm very grateful to the Prime Minister for offers of support right across the board. There'll be more staff in those settings, and I think that probably the best staff to have in those settings, more of them, are people that have got a clinical background. So I think you're going to see more and more nurses, for instance, in that hotel quarantine system, and I think that'll serve us well.
Have there been problems with those private security contractors in some cases breaching the rules?
Oh, look, I wouldn't want to identify any individual cases, but clearly we've had, across the board, we have had a number of people who have been given instructions to quarantine, and they have chosen not to do that. And I can't change that. That's happened. What I can do is ask all Victorians to follow what are pretty simple and basic rules. If you're sick, don't go out other than to get tested. If you are asked to quarantine, then you must quarantine. It's not optional. It is something that is critically important. This thing spreads so fast. If you make a judgment, oh, well, I can go about my business because I want to, well, that's fine, except it's not right. It's simply wrong. And it will only lead to one thing, and that's more people contracting this virus, who in turn will infect others, and we'll finish up with not these low numbers, but numbers much higher.
But I'm asking specifically about the private security.
You're asking specifically, and I'm not going to identify individuals because that I just don't. Well, I think James, sometimes, as you well know, sometimes when you answer questions about what is a pretty small cohort of people, then you may well be identifying individual cases, and I think there is a whole range of very valid reasons not to do that. We have had a couple of issues. We have dealt with those. We're confident that this is a bigger issue than just where people work. If it was just what you're alluding to, that would be one thing. But the notion that there's only one particular group of people or one particular class of worker working in one particular hotel, this is much broader than that, and it's people that are well away from hotel quarantine. It's people that have got nothing to do with hotel quarantine who are making the choice that they want it to be over, and therefore they're going to pretend that it is, and that's just not right.
Well, those people flouting the rules who had the virus, knowingly had the virus, will they be fined or even understand emergency powers?
They certainly, there is certainly, there are powers to deal with those people. Again, there's issues about, willful conduct needs to be dealt with, and I wouldn't rule that out. But at the same time, they're not decisions that I make, and I don't think you'd ever want to get to a situation where the Premier was directing police on who they should fine. That I don't think would be a very good outcome.
Premier, the New South Wales Premier this morning has said that she would be okay if staff in ski resorts and apartments refuse service to people from Victorian hotspots. What do you think?
Oh, look, I'm not interested in having a debate with Premier Berejiklian through the media. I've had a number of conversations with her over the last few days. We're working very closely together. She issued some advice yesterday. I'm perfectly comfortable with that. When we need to make, if and when we need to make announcements about how we're going to deal with these hotspots further, then of course we will. But that's not today.
That seems to be bordering on almost on discrimination, though, doesn't it? That sort of
Well, again, I'm
approach.
not interested in, as I said, having a debate with anybody through the media. I'm here today to talk about what we're doing, the challenge we face, and I'm here to ask Victorians really clearly, please do the right thing. If you don't, then every single Victorian will pay a really significant price for that. My relationship, my partnership, the work I'm doing with Premier Berejiklian, I wouldn't describe it in those terms. We've been having very productive discussions, and we will continue to.
Premier, the nature of Saturday's announcement that it was so last minute obviously impacted a lot of businesses. The Health Minister said yesterday that was based on observing trends from June 1. So how can it be that the government had no inkling before Saturday that they were going to have to push back these restrictions?
Well, look, I wouldn't accept any characterisation other than we made decisions on Saturday. We took no joy in making them. They were not easy, but it was based on data. And when you see multiple days where you've got community transmission, so cases that you can't track back to a source, then you've got no choice but to make the tough calls. Now, would you like to perhaps give people even more notice? Well, you always would. But the alternative, I'll sort of flip your question over. So what's the alternative? So as to avoid that inconvenience, we go to 50. We allow people still to have 20 people in a home, even though we know the evidence is very clear that a number of people were well and truly breaching that and putting all of us at risk. I don't think that would be leadership. Again, I've made it very clear, this is not about being popular. It's a pandemic, and it's about making the tough calls and doing everything you can to get this right. And this is not exact, it's not precise. One thing for certain, this is wildly infectious. And if people do the wrong thing, even in limited numbers for a limited time, it will spread. We know that. We absolutely know that. You can only follow the data. And whether that makes people happy or otherwise, that's where we're at. The alternative is to, I think, be focused on considerations that are not scientific and that will not serve us well.
Do you feel like we've let the rest of the country down in some way, like with our high numbers?
No, not at all. These are, if you look around the world, and even if you look at them in the context of the rest of the country, this is low-level community transmission, but it is of significant concern. It is of significant concern. And that's why, again, I'm not here to provide you with a commentary beyond what we're doing. This is our job to get on top of this, and we will, but only if Victorians work with me and the medical experts to do the right thing. I don't take, just be really clear about this, I don't take any joy in having to be take this tone with people. But it's very serious. This is very, very serious. And if people keep pretending that this is over, just because that's what they desperately want, and I understand that, we will finish up with a second wave, and we will finish up with businesses closed and people back in their homes. Now, we don't want that. So that's why there are literally hundreds and hundreds of people knocking on doors to make sure that everybody's got the message. That's why we're speaking in these terms. It's why we've had to change the rules around household gatherings, and it's why we've deferred the further opening up of our restaurants, cafes, bars, and the food service parts of pubs. I take no joy in that, but to do otherwise with community transmission would have been an irresponsible thing to do. And the final point I'll make before we go to the next question, as I'm sure there will be one, you've got a lag issue here. So you've got a couple of weeks. What I do today won't be reflected in the data for 2, perhaps even 3 weeks' time. That's the challenge. The life cycle of this virus, it's not 1 or 2 days, it's a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. So back to the earlier question, you've got to assume that there's more of it out there than you know about, even though we're doing one of the highest rates per 100,000 for tests anywhere in the world. You've got to err on the side of caution. Because if you do the wrong thing now in 3 weeks' time, it's well and truly away from you and there's no pulling it back.
Premier, is that the point at which you make a decision about further restrictions for these hotspots or easing them? Do we?
I wouldn't put Laura, I wouldn't put a timeline on it. And I'm acutely conscious that for people in those suburbs, now there's no joy in having your suburb or your local government area talked about in these terms. This is no reflection on the suburb. I want to be really clear about that. This is just where the virus is, and we will take appropriate action if and when we need to, and we will try and give those families and communities all the notice they need. And it'll be done simply on the epidemiology of this, the science, where the virus is actually presenting. It's no judgment beyond that. But again, if I get advice that those sorts of steps, a stay-at-home order, for instance, again, in parts of Melbourne, will be effective in driving these case numbers down, well then I'll look at that very, very carefully, and I'll make announcements if and when I need to.
You mentioned that strategy before, the suppression strategy that's been that way since the start.
Yes.
Considering how well other states have gone, do you think Victoria or National Cabinet could be agile and perhaps change that approach, considering how well the others are going, to bring us up to speed with other states? And in terms of move more towards an elimination strategy? Well,
I would say that if you have a sense of these things from around the world, and if you have a sense of these matters in a broader public health context, not just this virus, but public health more broadly, you either are pursuing an eradication strategy or you aren't. And we are pursuing, as a nation, a suppression strategy, and we're focused on doing everything we can. And the more successful you are at suppressing this, then there is every chance that you can drive those numbers down to very low levels, to the point of no cases. But that's not where Victoria finds itself, and that's not a reflection on the public health team. Literally, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people working 24/7. It is a reflection, I'm sad to say, on some Victorians who are not doing the right thing. And I ask you, for your family's benefit, for every family's benefit, please do the right thing. It's not complex. It's very simple. If you're sick, don't go to work. If you're sick, don't visit friends. If you've got mild symptoms, come forward and get tested. And if you're asked to isolate, please do as you are asked.
Is there any need to potentially compensate, particularly hospitality businesses?
Yeah,
Stocked up in
very good question, James. I'll have more to say about further business support very soon. I think we've processed something in the order of 95,000 grants to those most affected businesses. They were cash grants. There was also then significant support in waiving some taxes, but most importantly, providing full refunds to many thousands of businesses, the payroll tax that they had paid year to date. So three quarters of the year, that money went back to those businesses. We know and understand that cash flow is a really significant challenge, and I do acknowledge that the very difficult decisions we had to make on Saturday will of course further pain for some. And we are looking very, very closely at what we can do for those businesses, and I'll have more to say about that. Not today, because we aren't quite ready to do that, but I acknowledge that there is a clear need there.
Premier,
What's your advice to people in the hotspots with school holidays coming up?
Well, I might ask Annalise to speak to that, but obviously to be honest, it's not that different to the advice that's provided to every single Victorian. All of these rules apply no matter where you are, because if they break down, even gradually, even slowly, even in isolated instances, we will see more and more of this virus spread. And you can't rule out, that second wave. If everyone just pretends that the rules don't matter anymore, and I desperately want this to be over, so I'm going to pretend that it is, that's when we finish up in real trouble. On broader public health advice, which applies everywhere, but is critically important in hotspot suburbs, I might ask Annalise to add to my comments.
Thank you, Premier. So our advice really is actually very consistent across the board, with school holidays coming up, and generally, if you are unwell, don't go out, don't have play dates, don't have family events, don't go to work. Particularly, I think, with school holidays coming up, please just be sensible, use common sense. I understand that it's been a really difficult year, that there's been a lot of social activities that have been unable to happen, but please have a think about whether you need to have a social event every day. Kids are extremely resilient, and if we could really, it's about minimising those social contacts. We're seeing a significant increase in the number of contacts that people have when they are diagnosed. We're increasing the number of people that we have on quarantine as a result of those contacts, and that is because people are seeing each other more. They're having more events, be that within or outside of the limit restrictions that have been in place. The number of those events that are happening is increasing, and that really increases the opportunity for this virus to spread. And I really want to reiterate what the Premier has said. This is an extremely contagious virus. This is effectively spread like a cold, not effectively, actually spread like a cold. It's winter. You all know how quickly colds spread in social situations and in offices every winter. That's what we're trying to control here. So it's really, really crucial that with any symptoms that you stay home and that you get tested, and that you just be sensible, use common sense about your frequency of social contacts, and contacts outside your routine work and education commitments.
Well, you say in particular parts, in particular communities, not suburbs, but communities where there is a problem with family get-togethers.
I wouldn't be singling out any particular communities. Know that this is happening across a wide range of communities.
Just on Dr. Van Diemen, do we have a more virulent strain of this virus in Melbourne than, say, Sydney or Queensland?
That's a good question. The evidence does not indicate that at this point in time. Our overall hospitalisation, intensive care unit numbers, our overall death rates per numbers of cases are one of the lowest in the world, which indicates that we are finding, a pretty good proportion of our cases. There will be cases that we haven't found, like the Premier alluded to, but there isn't any evidence at this point in time that the strain in Melbourne is any more virulent in terms of severity of disease than in other countries, or in terms of its transmissibility than in other countries. I think it's really important for us to remember, I think we've all possibly become a bit immune to the international numbers. Numbers are going up in many, many countries of the world. We saw 150,000 cases in a single day last week. That's the highest number ever reported for this disease. We've had close to 500,000 deaths internationally. So we are somewhat in a bubble here, and that's fantastic. We're really lucky, but this hasn't gone away.
Is one of today's new cases in a housing commission in Melbourne?
I couldn't comment on that individually. We're seeing cases across a wide range of housing areas.
Could I ask about testing? The Premier said 16 to 18,000 yesterday. That sounds like it would be among the biggest, if not the biggest, day of testing we've had. Is that correct?
That's the information that I have from the sites, yes.
Okay. And if that's the case, does that mean now that people are going to have to it's going to take longer to get the results because so many people are getting tested?
Certainly. So increased testing numbers may result in some increases in turnaround times, and that really does indicate why it's really important for people to stay home whilst they have symptoms, and not just get a test and then go about their business after they've had the test. If you have symptoms, please get tested, and while you're waiting for those test results, please stay home.
Is it correct that some of those first
There has been rolling plans for some of these testing sites, and obviously those plans were made based on data from a week or two ago. We're reviewing all of those now, and additional things have been, sites have been added, and some of the ones that were due to close down are being retained, and that's being driven by where we're seeing the demand for testing, but also where we're seeing the cases.
Can I just ask the Premier in relation to the testing? We're getting more reports this morning of lengthy waits, 2 and 3 hour waits. Is that acceptable? And also, will that are you concerned that may deter people from going to get tested?
Well, I would just say that, obviously no one's pleased to wait for any period of time for pretty much anything. But there is when everyone is doing the right thing, and I'm deeply grateful to them, when you've got a lot of people wanting the same thing at the same time. And I do understand that the drive-through is perhaps seen by people as the safest way to do it. You're not having to spend time with other people, you're not sitting in a waiting room, you're not touching anything. I understand why people want to do that. If we've got to do more drive-through sites, we will. We've added in a whole bunch over the journey. I'm very, very proud to think that so many Victorians are coming forward and getting tested, even though they know it is going to take some time. I apologise for any delays. It's to a certain extent, it will be inevitable that there will be some waiting. But let's work as hard as we can to get those wait times down as low as possible. In terms of the question earlier on about hotspot suburbs, one thing we are doing, and one thing that we may take to another level, is the notion of localised testing and testing really significant numbers of people in those hotspot suburbs. You'd always prefer to do symptomatic testing rather than asymptomatic testing, but we wouldn't rule that out. And I'd be really confident that if we get to that point, we're already doing some of this, but if we took it to another level, I'd be really confident that the people in those communities would, just like all Victorians, they would come forward and get tested because they know, even with a wait, they know it's a massive contribution to our fight against this.
Are you relieved in a way to see those long queues as a sign perhaps that Victorians aren't taking it seriously again?
Well, I'll put it to you this way. I'm always pleased to see large numbers of people coming forward and getting tested. It makes you proud, seriously. Like the notion that people would give their time like that, and no matter how many test sites you have, there will always be, when so many people are being tested, there'll always be some waiting. I'm not celebrating that. That's inconvenient for people, but it does make you very, very proud to see so many people make such a powerful contribution to beating this thing. And we've seen literally heading towards 700,000 people who have given of their time to be tested. The majority of those have presented with symptoms. There's been some asymptomatic testing in particular settings, hospitals, schools, aged care, for instance, where there was a high risk. But the vast majority of those people have had symptoms, and it's a deeply impressive thing.
Another question for you, Dr.
Certainly.
AFL player Conor McKenna has only been seen to have close contact with one player, yet there's vision of him tackling more than one player at training over the week and Friday. How can that only be one player?
So the team's working really closely with the Essendon Football Club, with the AFL. We know from this virus that it is reasonably prolonged close contact with people, so at least generally 15 minutes of face-to-face within 1.5 metres or 2 hours in an enclosed room. So a single tackle, a single touch point of contact is not a high risk of transmission from a player to another player, in the same way as we're not seeing the person who gave you your coffee this morning getting it from you. So single touch points like that are not high risk, and we would see, and if that was the case, we would have seen huge amounts more of community transmission that we didn't know where it came up from than we have done now. So those assessments are really based on what we know from a whole range of international and local data.
Is there a chance that was a false positive, and if so, would that change anything?
We don't have any indication at this point that it's a false positive. It's been the test has been undertaken a couple of times. So at this point in time, no, there's no indication that it's a false positive.
The two cases today that are from known clusters, what are those clusters?
So the two cases that we've identified as being definitely linked to clusters are linked to the Keilor Downs extended family outbreak.
Premier, sure. Just on footy, just before we move off that, Rich, Honestly, Melbourne supporters, Rich, come on. Following Saturday's issues with Essendon, I've been in contact with Gil, and this is a challenging time for the AFL, but he's really clear, and I'm really pleased to be able to say that his team are working incredibly closely with the public health team, and have been for months now, and I think that'll serve not only footy, but it'll serve all of us very well.
Does the V-Line EBA breach the wages policy?
No, my advice is that the agreement is completely consistent with the government's wages policy, and we're very pleased to have been able to come to a fair and balanced outcome that rewards our staff, but also leaves enough money in the budget so we can continue all the other investments we need to do, not least of which a record investment in regional rail.
Do you expect public transport performance to improve now that you've replaced the minister?
I wouldn't see it that way at all. Minister Horn has been part of a team that's delivering the biggest investment in road and rail services in our state's history. She's now going to move to some other very challenging areas, and I'm very confident that she's going to do a fantastic job.
And what is it about this suburban rail loop that means it sits outside transport infrastructure?
It's not about sitting outside transport infrastructure. It's the biggest transport infrastructure project. Let me say that again. It's the biggest transport infrastructure project that our nation has ever seen. And I think giving it some dedicated focus is exactly the right thing to do. And I've got complete confidence, just like the fact that we're literally months and months ahead on level crossings. We are making enormous progress on Metro Tunnel. We are making progress on projects across the board, many of which are not easy and not simple, but there are tens and tens of thousands of Victorians who are in a job today because of our agenda and the fact that we get things done. Minister Allen, as Transport Infrastructure Minister and now the Minister for the Suburban Rail Loop, will continue to deliver that project. And we'll have, James, some very exciting announcements about Suburban Rail Loop very, very soon.
Premier, just back on football, could I just ask, are you worried that we're going to lose the grand final to somewhere like Perth, for instance, given that they can have crowds now?
The grand final and footy finals are a long way off. And to be honest, I'm not too focused on that issue. I'm focused on driving these numbers down and getting the message out to every single family that do the right thing by your family, do the right thing by every family, follow the rules. It's not just about you. You don't get to make choices that you're comfortable with that costs everyone else. You just don't get to do that. You've got to do the right thing. And if you don't, I can inform and I can reconfirm for people, Victoria Police are out there and they are going to enforce these rules. I hope it doesn't get to the point of issuing fines, but they will, and they have in the past. Many more warnings than fines, but they will issue fines if people are just making selfish choices that they're happy with, that ultimately put all of us at risk.
Just to confirm the advice to people living in those hotspots, are they good to go travelling around Victoria over the school holidays, or do they need to stay put?
At this stage, we're not providing any further advice than what Annalise has just taken you through. If you are unwell, then you should not be going on holiday. You shouldn't be going to work. You shouldn't be sending your kids to school. The list goes on and on. Again, this is common sense. And the notion of, if you're sick, not going and acting as if you aren't, that's not a new thing. And that's not just for hotspots, that's for every community right across the state. If I end on this point, if people just pretend this is over because they desperately want it to be, then this virus will spread, and we won't be standing here reporting these sorts of numbers. We'll be reporting much higher numbers. We will have a second wave, and we will have to go back into restrictions that will be crippling for business and deeply inconvenient and frustrating and difficult for every single Victorian. We don't want that, but we can't do it on our own. The public health team, as big and as good as they are at what they do, they can't do this on their own. I can't do this without the support of every single family. That's what I'm asking for. I don't think it's too much to ask. Everyone will benefit by everyone else following the rules and themselves. We're all in this together, and we've all got to make a contribution to beating this thing. There's no one gets a pass. No one gets to just pretend this is over, because it isn't. Not by a long way. Thanks very much, everyone.